Hi, everybody. This is Joe Firestone for Empowering Democracy. Pretty soon, Greg Mallard is going to arrive, and maybe D. Piers also. Hey, Kay, how are you? Okay, so you must know that since the debt ceiling crisis has started to heat up, more and more people are writing articles and doing shows on whether the debt ceiling crisis, well, really on both the nature of the debt ceiling crisis and also whether a solution to the debt ceiling crisis can be crafted uh, by minting a platinum coin, a high value platinum coin. Most people talk about the $1 trillion coin. But of course, the platinum coins can have all kinds of face values. They can vary from $50,000 to $50 million to $1 trillion to $5 trillion, $10 trillion, $30 trillion, $100 trillion. They can go as high as you want. The face value of these 1 ounce proof platinum coins can be whatever the Secretary of the Treasury wants them to be. And of course, the Secretary of the Treasury is in the position of taking orders from the President, so they can have whatever the face value, whatever face value the President wants them to have. So you have people, it's become a political campaign, and you have people who are calling for use of the platinum coin to stop the Republicans from basically blackmailing the Democrats into cutting spending. And a whole bunch of people now are on the side of the platinum coin. The ideas of the platinum coin were first introduced in 2010 by Beowulf, who later came to be known by his real name of Carlos Mucha. He was the first to suggest that you could use 1996 coin law as the authority needed to mint these very high value platinum coins. He wrote his first article on the subject on January 3rd of 2011. It appeared in Firedog Lake, the successor organization of which is Shadowproof. The second article on the platinum coin was written by myself on January 5th of 2011. I've never bothered to count the number of articles and blog posts that I've written on the platinum coin. I know, however, that I'm the only one who has written a book on the platinum coin, which is in the description for this video. So you have a link to it, okay, in the video. It's called Fixing the Debt Without Breaking America. And it can answer most of your questions about using the platinum coin. Unfortunately, very few people have read it. And certainly most of the press has not. And that's one reason why they're always coming forth with stupid ideas about the platinum coin. And there is Greg. Hello, Greg. Gregory Mallard of Revolution Evolution. on
Hmm.
Facebook and YouTube. Okay, and Greg and I and Dee and Brandy are teaming. We are team streamers, and Greg is one of the frequent panelists who come on my show, as I am a frequent panelist on his show and on Dee and Brandy's show
We're partners.
as well. We're partners, yes. We all belong to the same stream team. We should give a name to our stream team, by the way.
I agree. We should.
We haven't really done that. We need a name like the Duran or something like that.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
We'll have to spend time thinking about that. So, Steve greets us all, and Kay greets us all. Thank you very much. Uh, anyway, I'm going to get to the business for tonight very quickly now because we have a lot to cover. I want to focus today on a piece that appeared about some things Janet Yellen said. And then I also want to go over the views of Krystal and Saagar, which were expressed, I guess, just yesterday or the day before. And I'll go over those in some detail. Okay, and well, that is, they gave their views on their Breaking Points program. So I'm going to share the screen now. And I'll go over a piece that was actually sent to me by Carmen Munez, who isn't able to make it to the shows anymore because the shows don't coincide with the time when when she has the internet. And she still keeps up and is still very interested in what we do here. And she often sends me articles to take a look at. And she sent me this one written by Zara Tayeb that appeared in Market Insider or Markets Insider. Title of which is Janet Yellen shoots down the idea of a Fed-backed $1 trillion Treasury platinum coin to keep the U.S. from a debt default. I suppose that there are just a number of things to say about this particular title. The first thing one can say is that the $1 trillion Treasury platinum coin would not be backed by the Fed. It would be accepted by the Fed as a deposit that is made by the Treasury Department. So it's not like it's backed by the Fed. The Fed is the sole banking agent of the Treasury Department, or at least the principal banking agent of the Treasury Department. That, by the way, is mandated by law. Okay. So the Fed can hardly turn down a deposit of legal tender which is made by the Treasury Department. I don't think many people understand that. We're talking about a situation where the government mints a coin and then deposits it. It's the mint that actually creates the coin, and the mint deposits it in its public enterprise fund account at the New York Fed. And since it's legal tender, the New York Fed, and since the New York Fed is the sole banking agent of the Treasury Department, the Treasury Department, in my view, is obligated to credit that coin, whatever its face value is. And I have to add here that everybody talks about a 1 trillion Treasury platinum coin. but it could be whatever denomination is ordered by the Secretary of the Treasury. I personally favor the $100 trillion coin for various reasons. But I point out Janet Yellen shot down the idea of a Fed backed $1 trillion Treasury platinum coin. But what about the idea of a $100 trillion Treasury platinum coin? She hasn't said no to that yet. Now, of course, people will say, well, if she said no to 1 trillion, if she thinks 1 trillion's a bad idea, why would she think that 100 trillion is a good idea? Well, there are reasons that make that reasonable. For example, if all you minted was a $1 trillion platinum coin, then within 6 months, you might have similar problems coming back. I mean, 1 trillion after all is not a very large amount. Do you know that the Treasury Department repays government debt at an average of $400 billion a day? It redeems $146 trillion worth of government debt per year. How is that possible when we only have debt of 31.5 trillion? Well, it's possible because, of course, short-term debt, perhaps 3-month debt, is turning over a number of times per year. And then there's longer term debt than 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, okay, or even a year. There are a lot of different kinds of debt instruments out there. Okay, the point is, and all the different coins, okay, all the different kinds of debt instruments in the fiscal year 2022 were repaid, that is, to the tune of $146 trillion, because a lot of the debt was rolled over. So let's get to the meat of the article. Janet Yellen has crushed hopes the U.S. Treasury could mint a $1 trillion platinum coin to help cover the country's bills as it struggles with the debt default. Under the hashtag Mint the Coin plan, the White House would tell the U.S. Mint to issue a $1 trillion platinum coin, which would then be deposited at the Federal Reserve. The Biden administration could then withdraw money to pay the government's bills. Well, that's oversimplified, of course, but the point is there are many Mint the Coin plans, not just one Mint the Coin plan. I don't know what the White House's Mint the Coin plan is. It hasn't really said what it is. But it doesn't have to be a $1 trillion platinum coin plan. As I said before, there can be many denominations which the Biden administration might try to use. It's just the media who goes around talking about a $1 trillion Mint the Coin plan. And Janet Yellen said, quote, it truly is not by any means to be taken as a given that the Fed would do it. And I think especially with something that's a gimmick, unquote, Treasury Secretary Yellen said in a Wall Street Journal interview published on Sunday. Well, I have no idea what she means by a gimmick. There is a law out there that authorizes the Treasury Secretary herself to mint a coin of whatever denomination she chooses. She also has the authority to take that coin up to the New York Fed and deposit it in the public enterprise fund account of the mint. Then the Treasury Department, according to another law, can sweep the mint account for the sovereignty that's in the coin. What is the sovereignty? It's the profit between the face value of the coin and the expenditures in minting the coin and getting up to the New York Fed Bank. So for a $100 trillion coin, there's nearly $100 trillion in seigniorage in that coin that can be swept from the public enterprise fund account up into the Treasury general account, which is the primary spending account of the Treasury Department. If they wanted to, if she wanted to, she could mint such a coin and she could have it up to the New York Fed sometime tomorrow. So it's not a question of whether the Fed would do it in the sense of minting the coin or creating the coin. What she's telling us is that it is not by any means to be taken as a given that the Fed would credit that coin. And she says the following: the Fed is not required to accept it. There's no requirement on the part of the Fed. It's up to them what to do, said Yellen, a former chair of the U.S. Central Bank. Well, I know she was a former chair of the U.S. Central Bank, but she was never presented with, or the New York Fed was never presented with a platinum coin and faced with a demand by the Treasury Secretary to credit that platinum coin because it was legal tender. The important point to note here is that if the coin were taken up and were deposited with a request to immediately credit the coin to the chair of the New York Fed Bank, as the sole banking agent of the Treasury receiving a legal tender coin, the chair of the New York Fed Bank would be obligated to credit the coin with $100 trillion and give those reserve credits to the public enterprise fund account of the U.S. Central Bank. If the head of the New York Fed were to balk at this and say, there's no way I'm going to credit this coin, then the Secretary of the Treasury could be mandated by the president to go to the chair of the Board of Governors of the Fed and to demand that that coin be credited by the chair of the New York Fed. And if the head of the New York Fed were still to resist that, then what would happen is that the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen in this case, would either resign or would be directed by the president to say to the Fed chair that the Fed Act states plainly that where there are differences in monetary interpretation between the Secretary of the Treasury and the Chair of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, that the interpretation of monetary details put forward by the Secretary of the Treasury shall be controlling. That language is in the Fed Act. It's not a joke. It's not some kind of weird thing. It's not a gimmick. That control structure is part of the Fed Act. If the chair of the Board of Governors was still unwilling to credit the coin, then the law says that the chair of the Board of Governors can be fired for cause by the President of the United States. Does everybody get this authority structure now? They don't want to treat each other in this way. They're all colleagues. The Fed's supposed to be independent. Yes, I know all this. They wouldn't like it to act that way. But the fact is that the Secretary of the Treasury has that authority, and Joe Biden has that authority. Those authority structures exist. Going on with the article, officials in the Biden administration and Democratic lawmakers have floated the idea of the coin to avoid a wrangle in Congress over raising the debt ceiling. All kinds of people have floated the possibility. The U.S., the article points out, hit the $31.4 trillion borrowing limit on Thursday, forcing the Treasury to step in with so-called extraordinary measures to prevent a default. But these measures would only stave that off until early June. The political debate about how much money the government can borrow to make its payments. Congress is shaping up for a standoff as Republicans want any debt ceiling agreement to include cuts to government spending, while Democrats have rejected that move. The Biden administration insists that the statutory limit on its borrowing should be raised without any conditions, and Biden should continue to insist on that. The $1 trillion coin, which exploits a loophole in U.S. currency law, would allow the U.S. to keep paying off its bills without any agreement from Congress or issuing new debt. Hey, that's not true. Specifically, the U.S. doesn't need the agreement of Congress to keep on paying its bills. It is mandated by Congress to keep on paying its bills. When Congress appropriates spending, that is a mandate for the executive to conform to. It's the duty of the president to spend that money that has been appropriated by Congress. There has been the agreement from Congress when they did the appropriations. One house of Congress cannot withdraw that agreement by passing a bill that will never get through the Senate, saying that they want a change in the law. I mean, they can try to do that, but what I'm saying is the president will still have the obligation to spend, a legal obligation under the Constitution to spend. A lot of other obligations are in place. For example, every congressman has an obligation to avoid defaulting on the debt. That is specified in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, that no one must question the debt of the United States and that it must be paid on time. All the Congress people have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, including the 14th Amendment. It's their obligation, including the obligation of all those nutty Republicans to do whatever they can to stop any default on the debt. They've committed to that with their oaths. I'll tell you something else. They're not the only people who are committed to that through their oaths. Janet Yellen has sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution. The president has sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution. So if there's anything the president can do to avoid the U.S. defaulting on its debt, he has a legal obligation to do that. If he doesn't do it, technically speaking, he would be impeachable. Now look at the strange stuff that's going on here. The Congress is saying, I'm not going to fulfill my obligation. I'm going to threaten to default on the debt so I can get the Democrats to do something. I mean, right there, they're questioning the debt and they're breaking their oaths to the Constitution. But the idea the president seems to have that it's up to the Republicans to pass a clean bill and that he's unwilling to negotiate, on anything. I'm sorry, I'm not saying he has to negotiate. He doesn't have to negotiate because there are other measures open to him. One of these measures that he can do to avoid a default is use the platinum coin and have a platinum coin whose denomination is large enough to end this particular crisis. I said before, I don't think 1 trillion is large enough. I think you have to have a platinum coin minted, which can handle roughly 6 months of debt repayments at $400 billion a day. It's going to have to be a coin that starts to approach the $100 trillion. Just to be sure you have enough. Of course, the debt ceiling would not be an issue very soon, because if you're paying off $400 billion a day, in 10 days, you've paid off $4 trillion of the debt. So there's now $4 trillion of space between the debt ceiling and what the sum of the debts would be after only 10 days. Because the Treasury, again, is paying off an average of $400 billion a day. So you get $4 trillion worth of space. Suddenly, no more debt ceiling crisis. What I'm saying is that if this goes on and the default threatens, let's say sometime in May or June, then Yellen and the president would be obligated to mint the coin and make it large enough that it would settle the crisis. In other words, it's either mint the coin or compromise with the Republicans. But we who know how this works, know that the president doesn't have to accept the debt, the terrorism of the Republicans, because he can mint that coin and send them packing. So here's Yellen. She also urged lawmakers to, quote, act in a timely manner to increase or suspend the debt limit to prevent the U.S. from facing a catastrophic economic situation. Okay. Now we're going to see fairly shortly that that's not what you should be doing. That's not good strategy. But we'll bring that up in just a little while when we talk about the Krystal Saagar situation. Okay, so in the description, I put the YouTube link to their piece on one of their Breaking Points programs. Okay, I break in a lot of where Saagar says, okay, a lot of this, the debt ceiling crisis, is also belied by the whole mint the coin discussion, much of which that you have seen over here. And I will just say that some mint the coin advocates have completely beclowned themselves over the weekend. Our friend Jeff Stein, he's a correspondent for the Washington Post, actually reached out to two of those leading theorists behind the mint, the $1 trillion coin. They are big modern monetary theory activists about some of the concerns that you've been hearing from the White House. Okay, and I think it is bare. I'm not sure what that bare was. I was getting this from their transcript, okay, on YouTube. But then he says, so I'm cool with the idea of mint the coin. Yeah, that's what Saagar says. That said, if this is how it is, I'm out. So let's go and put this up there on the screen. So here's what Stein asked some of these activists, Rowan Gray and Nathan Tankis.
Nathan Tankis is awesome.
Okay. I'm getting unilateral options from pushback from the administration officials. Here's what they're concerned about in the event of a mint the coin. But if the coin happens, and right after those three words, I want to introduce the following comment of mine. That means that the coin is minted and credited. That's what the coin happens means. Now they're glossing over what it means. What coin? In my view, it's the 100T coin. But it could be any one of the $1 trillion coins. They don't specify what exactly coin would be used. So then the Treasury immediately begins to pay down debt and spend appropriations. Last fiscal year, 2022, 147,342,671,671,000,000 was redeemed. That's an average of roughly 400 billion per day. That is to say, I took that figure, I divided by 365. In 10 days, that's 4T in debt paid down, okay, which would eliminate the debt ceiling crisis right there. In 10 frickin' days. 2, then the GOP says that it's BS and it leads to an immediate court challenge and legal uncertainty. Okay, now all this is that I've just been saying about them is in the first 52 seconds of their clip. Okay, what are the problems with this? First, okay, or A, the House must say it's BS and create the court challenge. This assumes all Republicans want to have the court challenge. If a few defect and all the Democrats stay together, there might be no court challenge. But in either case, the vote for a resolution to take to the court would be highly partisan, suggesting that only Republicans are challenging and that only the House is challenging, not the Senate. So this would be a challenge not from Congress as a whole, or even the House as a whole. Thus, the House challenge must get standing at SCOTUS. They cannot sue if they don't have standing. Standing has to be determined first. This is not trivial. The House must show that minting the $100 trillion coin and using it to pay down the U.S. debt and avert the D.C. crisis damaged the House of Representatives or House Republicans in some way, or it won't get standing. But what damage would they have sustained? All that would have happened is that the debt would have been paid as it fell due, and the appropriations would have been spent according to the planned schedule of spending appropriations, which were dictated by the Congress in the first place. So what is the damage that the House or the House Republicans would have sustained in such a scenario? Exactly what would be the grounds for a legal case? SCOTUS has in the past refused to give standing to suits by Democrats in the House and Senate on grounds that they lack standing and don't have a reasonable case for damages so that they can suggest a remedy. So how many days would it take to get standing? Perhaps longer than it would take to pay down $4 trillion of the debt subject to the limit. If so, the coin will have avoided the crisis because SCOTUS would not be in a position to revoke the federal payments already made from the coin seigniorage. In other words, you can't imagine that the court would seek to recapture the federal payments that had been made to pay off debt or to do congressional appropriations. This would be much too complex for the courts to order and would put the court in a position of creating the financial crisis for the United States and the whole world by themselves. Further, why would SCOTUS take this case? It is a dispute between one house of Congress and the executive branch. Why would the court mix in? Sure, the issue is of prime importance, but the reputational risk to the Supreme Court would be enormously high. What if its decision causes a collapse of the United States and even the world economy? Then what happens the next time a congressman introduces a bill to pack the court or impeach a justice? Question mark. Would the court really want to take such risks? Saagar talks cavalierly about this court wanting to invalidate the coin. Now that's a reasonable guess on his part. But however much they may want to declare a use of the coin unconstitutional, he doesn't mention or consider the political risk to them of doing so, or argue that they'd be willing to assume that risk. And nobody who has talked cavalierly about the coin, about the court invalidating the coin, has talked about the risk that would be involved in the court actually doing this. I don't think the court would take that risk. I'd go even further and say that such a case would go 7-2 in favor of the executive branch, because only Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito are crazy enough and bitter enough to want to bring down the whole economy to get their way. John Roberts would certainly back off. The three Democratic appointments would certainly be against doing this in favor of the government. So, what would the others do? I think Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett wouldn't want to assume that risk. They'd go along with Roberts and go to the Democratic side. So my view is that this would be a 7-2 decision in favor of the executive branch. Specifically, they wouldn't want to give the lawsuit from the House standing because they wouldn't want to have to consider the merits of the case. I think they're going to run like scared rabbits away from this case. If they invalidate the court, if they didn't do that, and they took the case and they invalidated the coin, they would exacerbate the financial crisis and get Wall Street very angry at them. In fact, as they were taking on the case, Wall Street would be getting extremely angry at them. I doubt they would want to do that since it was Wall Street that put them in there in the first place. So I think the House would not get standing and the court would stay out of it. But if they didn't, then they're looking at a lengthy decision process. And by the time they're through, the motivation of the crisis would be over because all the short-term debt would be paid by the coin seigniorage, by the profits from the big platinum coin that I propose ought to be minted. 3. This comes from something else Saagar said. Then the Treasury goes to market with auction at some point, but because of the uncertainty, bondholders demand a high premium, leading to much higher federal borrowing costs. For conservative courts could strike down that coin, forcing the White House back to negotiate with the GOP in an even weaker position. I'm sure you guys have thought about this. Just let me know what the response is. Well, I've thought about it. Here, Saagar hasn't recognized the Treasury would not be going to market again to sell bonds until the crisis was over. If the Fed credits a coin with a high enough face value, then it could use the proceeds to pay down the debt without going to market till the crisis is over. Obviously, Saagar hasn't thought of this. He thinks that Treasury would be going to market in the short run to borrow some more money. Hell, if a $100 trillion coin were minted, the Treasury might not be going to market again in the foreseeable future. Maybe not for 10 years. Maybe not for 15 years. I don't think Saagar has thought about that. I don't think Saagar is at all familiar with the dynamics of how the Treasury pays back debt.
I think they seriously need to have Rohan Gray on the show to discuss this at greater length so they have a better and more clear understanding.
Well, I personally think they need us both on the show because when Rohan Gray answered Jeff Stein about what ought to be done, he didn't distinguish himself. I'll talk about that, in just a minute. Okay. So Saagar goes on, he says, here is what Rohan Gray says the answer is: ignore SCOTUS. I know that sounds extreme. Okay, this comes from a quote that Rowan gave to Jeff Stein. I know that sounds extreme, but if they side with Gates, that, okay, is Matt Gates, the congressman, then the choice is to ignore them or default, demand that the Fed accept the coin, send troops to the Fed. Okay, talking about demanding that the Fed accept the coin, I've already told you that the Fed has an obligation to accept the coin. If it refuses and continues to refuse, then the president has the authority to fire the Fed chair and get someone who would be likely to immediately take over and become the acting Fed chair. That acting Fed chair would be Lyle Brainard, who's a Democrat and who is fairly lefty when it comes to Federal Reserve governors. She would be the likely acting Fed chair. And if Biden had a coin that he wanted deposited to the account, it's nearly certain that she would make the deposit. She would authorize the crediting of the $100 trillion coin. Because she knows that the worst thing that could happen is for the United States to default and for the world economy to be disrupted, not just our economy, but there's real risk the whole system, the whole international system would collapse if we allowed a default. She knows that's a really, really serious thing. Personally, I think Jay Powell knows it also, and that he might well, in the end, credit the coin, whatever he says now. But my point is, if he doesn't, then Lyle Brainard is there to pick up the slack. And going on, there's nothing in the Constitution that gives SCOTUS alone sole authority to interpret the Constitution. All officers of the United States have the obligation to uphold the Constitution, which requires that they interpret it and the laws passed under its authority. If the court should rule that the coin is unconstitutional, the president may respectfully disagree, point out that Congress granted Treasury the authority to mint the coin, which is, by the way, in the plain language of the coin law, and that he, the president, has used it to perform his duty to avoid default as required by the 14th Amendment, Section 4, and also to enable him to spend the appropriations that were mandated by Congress. So basically, he can respectfully say he was only doing his duty under the Constitution, and that duty supersedes the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Constitution and the coin law. There is no need here to send troops to the Fed or to occupy SCOTUS, which is what Saagar was saying, which was what Saagar's interpretation of the remarks given by Rowan. Again, Saagar says, the constitutional and monetary moments that are analogous to this are Lincoln, okay, and FDR. Oh, wait a minute, I've moved. No, are Lincoln, okay, and FDR. I think that's right. It's hardball. Oh, wait a minute. This is still Rowan. The constitutional monetary moments that are analogous to this are Lincoln and FDR. It's hardball, or if it isn't SCOTUS, it is forcing the Fed to ignore the 14th Amendment.
I'm
Literally.
gonna go for tonight to get ready for my show, and I'll
Okay.
be live at 10 in a few minutes.
Okay, I won't be very long.
Okay, take your time.
Literally, the Civil War Amendment to support white supremacists trying to shut down the government. So there's a lot going on there. What he's saying effectively is that it's like a Civil War type thing when Lincoln ignored the orders of the Supreme Court around habeas corpus. And Saagar says, I don't think we're exactly in a similar situation. Also, let's put it this way. Is Joe Biden going to do any of that? Well, yeah. My reply is whether Biden would defy a Supreme Court decision isn't relevant to the question of whether Biden can mint the coin and make it stick in order to save the economy. The issue of whether he can or cannot comes first. Then we can address the issues of whether he should or would mint the coin. Why is Saagar shifting from whether he can do it to whether he will? Is he conceding to the right wing? Look, Saagar says, even if you agree, even if you think this is a feasible strategy, which I think that's insane and actually would spark even less faith and credit in the United States economy, I reply to that. Would the good faith and credit of the U.S. be damaged by this process? Why? The U.S. would have paid off all its short term debt and demonstrated the enormous currency power of the federal government, as well as the power of the 14th Amendment's prohibition against default. Going on with what Saagar said. That's the road that we had to go down to pay our debt. Well, that's obviously not going to happen. So increasingly, Krystal, and I do have to say what Stein, the pushback that he's laying out there specifically about the court striking the coin. Okay, all I have to say about this is the transcript. This is Saagar talking. Okay, if you notice that it's not very well structured. You and I both know that's very, and of course he's talking to Krystal now, that's very within the realm of the possibility. The third one is actually an important point too, that if Treasury goes to market with the auction, but because of the uncertainty that bondholders demand a higher premium, as in if the market doesn't believe that it's real in enough at auction that even if you mint the coin, you're still in a technical default. So it's like, when the more I'm looking at this, even though conceptually, if everyone bought the idea, I just don't think it's feasible. I don't think it's going to work. Why does he say that? Well, he's probably thinking that it's just going to be a $1 trillion coin and Treasury is going to have to go back to the market soon. But what if it's a $100 trillion coin? Then Treasury is not going to have to go back to the market for a very long time. And also, Treasury and the Fed will have demonstrated that the currency power of the government is much stronger than they ever imagined, and that there can't be a default if Treasury and the Fed are willing to obey the 14th Amendment. But again, the question here is not whether Biden will do it. The first question is whether he can do it, whether the combination of the Fed and the Treasury can do it. I don't think, off what I've said, that it's arguable whether they can do it. Okay, they can do it. And about the question of a technical default, No, they won't be in a technical default because they will have paid off all the short term debt and all the other debt falling within the period of the crisis. If the crisis is 6 months, they would have paid out that debt too. $100 trillion is enough to pay off all of the debt that falls due. And remember, there won't be any rolling over of debt. In other words, all this debt has to be redeemed in a single year because they're constantly rolling over the short term debt. But this time, when they pay off the short term debt, that falls due in a month or 2 or 3 months or 6 months. That's not going to be replaced by new debt that they floated. So they won't have to pay off 147 trillion or 80 trillion or 70 trillion or anything like that. If they paid off all the short-term debt, they'd probably have to pay off about 15 trillion. That's it. Once paid off, they're not redoing it. So I don't think Saagar knows what he's talking about. I don't think he knows anything about the details of how debt and repayment flows. I don't think he knows what's in the daily Treasury statement. I don't think he knows what's in the monthly Treasury statement, but he's commenting on details as if he knows what's going on. He says, say the coin, okay, is minted, or say the coin, okay, is done. And then he leaves out all the details about whether it's going to be credited or not, or how it might be credited, or the laws that govern the crediting process, or the laws that govern the relationship between the Treasury Secretary on the one hand and the chair of the Federal Reserve on the other. He doesn't know anything about the legal structure, but he's commenting as if he straightforwardly understands that particular process. I got to say, I don't think Saagar has done his homework. Anyway, the last thing I read from him is a summary of his earlier statements, offering nothing new, that the idea if you mint the coin, you'd still be in a technical default. You wouldn't be in any default if you use the proceeds to pay the debt as it falls due.
It's 10:01.
Right. The White House has no choice but to negotiate, he says. I thought that honestly, these were reasonable concerns. Because ultimately, yeah, if there's a lot of uncertainty over whether or not this coin will be upheld, and given the makeup of the Supreme Court, I think it's a decent chance that it would not be upheld. And I explained earlier why I don't think the Supreme Court is going to give standing to the House or to the House Republicans. It's not even the House they give standing to. They're giving standing to the House Republicans. Saagar hasn't shown that there's no choice but to negotiate. He's claiming that, but he hasn't shown that for all the reasons I've laid out. If he tries the coin and the court decides against it, the president will still have diffused the crisis by paying down a huge portion of the debt. Nor would he be in the same place as before, because the immediate crisis would be over, and one of his options to avoid default would have been rejected. There are two other options the president has to avoid a default. He could challenge the constitutionality of the debt ceiling law. He wouldn't have been able to challenge it before the case went to the Supreme Court. But if the Supreme Court were to kick it out, then one of his three options for avoiding default would be gone. He would then have two options left. One is issuing debt instruments called the consols. Those are debt instruments that do not require the repayment of the principal. They're perpetuals, also called. those could be issued by the Treasury to avoid a default. There's nothing prohibiting that. The debt ceiling law is written in such a way that it applies only to debt that must be repaid. But consols only have to be repaid at the option of the government. So that's one option. The other option to avoid default is to take the case to the Supreme Court and to point out, okay, to the Supreme Court that Congress has given conflicting mandates to the president. In other words, the president has the responsibility to spend all the appropriations that were approved by the Congress. But the debt ceiling is preventing him from issuing more debt so that he can do his duty. And then the Supreme Court would have to rule. I don't think the Supreme Court could leave the president in this type of situation. The Supreme Court would have to decide either you obey the debt ceiling law or you obey congressional appropriations and spend those congressional appropriations mandates. So the court would have to decide which one it would be. I don't think that it would decide for default. It would have to decide. It would have to decide because of the risk of tanking the world economy. It would have to decide that the debt limit law is unconstitutional. Now, that law wouldn't have been unconstitutional if the court had left the executive branch the out of paying down the debt and paying the appropriations by minting the platinum coin. But if the court removes that option, then the court would be in the position of either ordering the Treasury to issue perpetuals, okay, as debt, or declaring the debt ceiling law unconstitutional. That's what it would be left with. So now Krystal says, so you guys know, I've been an advocate of this, she means the coin, as well as, but looking at not only the reasonable concerns that were raised, but also the response to those concerns, as you put it, Saagar. Listen, bottom line, whether you think this is the right path or not, there is no way in hell that Joseph Robinette Biden is going to nullify the Supreme Court and send troops to the Fed, and not going to happen, guys. Well, I mean, that's a reply to Rowan, okay, and what he said. Okay, I agree. Joe Biden is not going to send troops to the Fed. That's not going to happen. And he's not going to send troops to the Supreme Court either. But other presidents in his position, he's going to have to choose. Do I ignore what the Supreme Court has decided? Or do I allow the whole economy to tank and get blamed for it and have my presidency ruined by these Republicans who won't do their duty and do all they can to prevent a default? I think Joe Biden at that point would say, well, to hell with it. I'm just not going to listen to the Supreme Court. And he could cite other precedents from other presidents. God bless you, honey.
Sorry, thank you.
So Krystal finishes, says, this is not a feasible option also, by the way. So again, I say Krystal is changing the grounds of the argument. The first question is whether minting the coin is feasible for a president to use. It is feasible and practical. If he refuses to use it, then it's on him for fecklessness. Why won't Krystal and Saagar say that? Why won't they say Biden has the option? Why doesn't he exercise the option? They said those kinds of things often enough when it came to student debt, when it came to other things. They suggested that he was feckless in many other situations. Why are they refusing to say it in this particular situation? Not to mint the coin if the Republicans push him to it would be feckless. Krystal goes on. There's comments out from Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen this morning saying that they're not going to go in this direction. She says truly is not by any means to be taken as a given that the Fed would do it, referring to like that Fed would actually do this or accept this. And I think especially with something that's a gimmick, she said in the Sunday interview with the Wall Street Journal, she also said the Fed is not required to accept it. There's no requirement on the part of the Fed. It's up to them what to do now. I've already outlined why this is not true, why this is BS. And they would know it if they had studied the law surrounding the coin. If they had read my book, for example, they would know it. If they read some of the articles that have been written by Rowan and Nathan, okay, and the discoverer of the platinum coin idea himself, Carlos Mucha. Anyway, I've already discussed Janet Yellen and her excuses. She's trying to politic her way out of this. Krystal says, and I agree, listen, I think strategically it's probably not wise to totally pour cold water on the idea in terms of their negotiating position. I think that's probably a foolish move to ultimately make, but basically, guys, this is not a real option, not with this president, not in this moment. So how is this going to get resolved? I genuinely do not know, says Krystal. So before I go into Saagar's reply, I'm going to point out that Krystal is absolutely right that this is strategic stupidity to dismiss the use of the coin. It was strategic stupidity for Obama when he did it. And it's strategic stupidity for Janet Yellen to take that position. She should be shouting to the heavens, if the Republicans push us to it, we're going to mint that coin. And they won't like the amount of face value we put on that coin. And there's nothing they can do about it. So they need to come to the table and settle. And the way they need to settle is not to raise the debt ceiling. It is for them to join with the Democrats to repeal the debt ceiling law entirely, so it can never be used again. And if they refuse to do that, then I'm going to mint that coin. And it's going to have some really, really, really high value that will never be realized. That's what you should be talking about right now. And if she were talking about that right now and talking tough, it would scare the living crap out of the Republicans. It's at that point, it's game, set, and match. Anyway, Saagar replied to Krystal's statement that she genuinely does not know what would happen. Saagar says, I think I know it's going to go to sequestration. They're going to agree to a hell of a lot of budget cuts, and there's going to be a ton of discretionary spending cuts outside of the military and outside of Social Security. Hate to say it, very much will impact a lot of people, but I don't see any way out of that. Well, that is Saagar's view. He's basically giving in to Republican terrorism, saying the Democrats must give in and give away programs very valuable to people, completely protect the military spending, and not protect dozens of great programs, kill his own programs. He's saying that the only way forward is for Biden to give in to Republican terrorism. Are these supposed to be social democrats? Well, I know Saagar is supposed to be a conservative, but still, all Saagar is saying that Biden's got to do what Obama did in 2012 and 2013, which led to the longest recovery from a major recession or depression in U.S. history. Well, I see a way out of that. The way out of it is for Biden to mint the platinum coin. And if he doesn't do that, we should scream to high heaven. And by the way, we ought to make clear to him that he's got to mint a very, very high value platinum coin. So there's Saagar, in my view, giving in to Republican terrorism. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say tonight. Spent a considerable amount of time working on this today. I hope you liked it. The Republicans, of course, don't have a leg to stand on, but neither do Janet Yellen and Krystal and Saagar. Yeah, Saagar is a right winger, but most of the time he doesn't sound like a winger. And most of the time he sounds like a very reasonable person. My gripe here is that neither of them have done their research on the platinum coin. Neither of them have done that. They know very little about it. They should have kept their mouths shut because they know very little about it. They were unqualified to speak about it. Okay, comments here to go over briefly, then I got to go join Greg. After the greetings, Steve says, what if Joe Biden forgets where he put the coin? This is Steve Wolfbrand. What's a few trillion between friends? Greg Mal says, just coming in to give this a second like. Steve Wolfbrand says, I have a strange feeling they will actually default on the debt in this time. If Biden is feckless, yes. Kay says, they might, but I sure hope not, Steve. 7 says, just got here, sorry. Well, I know it's not always possible to get here on time. Steve says, it's all imaginary money anyway. Well, it's money created out of thin air, Steve, you know that. 7 says, cheerio, everyone. Just hit here. What's on deck? Just got here. Sorry. Yes, it is, but you have to make the Fed admit that. Steve says, hello, 7. 7 says, Steve, my man, I remember you from last night. How are you? I'm very well, 7 or 7 even. Not sure how he wants it said. Nice to see you, 7 says. Likewise, brother. Steve says, cool. 7 says, deep stuff. Steve says, not going to happen with these politicians, Doc. Sorry. They don't have, quote, vision, unquote. I know they don't have vision. But the point is, We don't gain anything by by constantly saying not going to happen. What we gain is by saying it ought to happen. He has the power, and we're going to keep on harassing his ass until he does it. 7, seems SCOTUS would love to sabotage the executive branch. I don't trust them. They'd love to sabotage the executive branch, but they live in the same economy we live in. They've got stock investments. They've got all kinds of things that can be ruined. The value of their homes, for example, in the DC area. They live among us. And if the world economy is a total disaster, it's going to affect them too. Now, okay, as I said, I think that Thomas and Alito are crazy and would like to see the government of the United States fall, and in my view, would like to see a fascist state actually rise. I don't think the others are quite as strong in that particular direction. I think Roberts is for a limited democracy of some sort, and that Kavanaugh is somewhat similar to Roberts. I think Amy Coney Barrett has very religious views that may put her in the same camp as as Thomas and Alito, but I'm not sure about that. We haven't seen enough of her yet. 7 says, that's what I mean, Joe. Thomas and Alito are especially corrupt. They are. Definitely something to ponder, Steve. I used to watch their show a lot, but not much anymore. What show, Kay? Krystal and Saagar's, it was probably the Rising show then. It's now Breaking Points. I forget the name now, Steve. Laugh out loud. Don't watch it enough to remember. Steve says, I don't have any debt. I pay cash. Well, as you know, the government creates the cash. So, good show, 7 says. Well, considering even topic once again. Kay says, I don't have debt either at that point. Kay, Steve Grumbine. What about Steve Grumbine? That Saagar dude must be a right-winger. Yeah, he is. Kay says, no, that isn't it. 7, sort of, but not really. Steve, it's Breaking Points. 7 says, good program, but thought-provoking. Yeah, it is often thought-provoking. It was certainly provoking my thoughts today because I didn't know which end was up. Okay, 7. That's what I'll do. Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm going to hightail it over to Greg's program right now,
Joey,
and I'm going to get that link for you.
ask
Yes?
everybody to share what you just talked about.
Oh, yes. Please like, share, and subscribe everything. I was reminded by Bonnie to ask you to do that. Okay. And let me see. Okay, let me give you the YouTube link to Greg's show. Where is Revolution Evolution? Oh, it's in the Around the World chat. That's where it is. Okay. Okay, I'm still here, folks. I'm getting the YouTube link to Greg's show for all of you. Here it is. Oops. That doesn't look like any link that's going to work. Oh, it's a Facebook YouTube link. Okay. Okay, I don't think I did that very well. I guess that's the best I can do. I'm gonna hit this now. Okay, did they fail the litmus test based on their PAC contributions? Yeah, it seems like we're seeing a pattern that all these candidates decided that they would be safe if they took the PAC money because everybody was doing it. Yes, the monkey see, monkey do effect. Yes. Hmm. Oh yeah. 2,500. So he was very generous to other congressional colleagues. Well, how much did he give to other Congress people? Yes, he was a real Pac-Man.
Minute. I'm good. I'll say what.
Yes, from New York. I think she's a favorite of Hakeem Jeffries. Yeah, pretty good sized war chest. Yeah, yeah. She's in a very safe district for Democrats. Oh, yeah, with the exception of Nancy Pelosi and AOC. Okay, and I think also Katie Porter. She was a monumental fundraiser.